There we go. Hey, good morning, guys. How we doing? Good to hear. I'm glad you guys are here today. We'll just go ahead and start this off, get the most important thing out of the way. Go Lions. All right, cool. There we go. All right. I didn't know if we were going to pray for them this morning or what. I was going to see how it was going to go. But hey, I'm glad you guys are here today. We started a new series last week called 12 Steps. We're talking about addiction and about finding a way to break through all of the things that hold us captive and cause destruction in our life. And here's the thing, typically when we talk about addiction, it becomes really, really easy to just kind of put that on somebody else. We play like the comparison game and we find ways to just like put that over somebody else. We belittle maybe our own thing, right? Like, hey, it's not quite that big of a deal, or hey, at least I'm not doing these other things, or my all-time favorite, hey, you know what, everybody does it, right? We have all of these phrases or things that we do. Another route is that we just try to avoid it, like at all costs when it comes to this, because it's a secret. And we feel like we've got it managed. And so we can just kind of like keep it under wraps, because if somebody else finds out, man, that could cause some pain. Or if I deal with it, that's gonna cause pain. So we're just gonna kind of tuck it down here all the way through. I got asked this past week, hey, why are we talking about addiction? Like that seems kind of heavy to walk into on a Sunday morning. I like coming in and hearing like Moses parted the sea, not like, hey, I'm an addict. Like that feels a lot. Like why would we be going over something like this? I love talking about Moses. We can do a whole series on him, like a whole year long. Moses is a great thing. But we're talking about this particular subject for a couple of reasons. First, addiction causes serious pain. Like some of you guys know that way too well. That when we allow something to consume our hearts and our minds and our actions and to try and fill that space inside of us that's only reserved for God, we recognize that it causes damage. Damage to us and potentially damage to those that we care about. Secondly, we're talking about this because we all struggle at times in different ways. It is so easy to pinpoint the damage and the struggles of addiction to things like drugs and alcohol or gambling, and to just kind of sweep those addictions to safety and anxiety and spending and eating and exercising and gaming and working and cutting and pornography and so many other things just right underneath the rug. It's easy to just kind of hide those, and yet when we don't deal with these things, they become habitual and destructive in our life, and they begin to enslave us, maybe emotionally, maybe financially, maybe relationally, maybe spiritually. So no matter what your thing is and how big or how little you believe it to be, we could all use some wisdom and help breaking through to a life that finds true freedom in Jesus. See, last week, Rick started off with step one, this idea that admitting that we are powerless over sin and that our lives have become unmanageable. Today, we're going to jump into steps 2 and 3 together. And there's a helpful resource we want you guys to know is available for you. If you want to jump into this a little further, there's a book entitled A Hunger for Healing by Keith Miller. We've actually got a few of them available back at the Connect kiosk on a display there that you could purchase. Or if you're really cool and you're using the Northpointe app this morning, hint, hint, right there. You can see a link there on the bottom. That's a link to Amazon, and you can purchase that. If you're a Prime member, it'll be here in like 2 days. If you're not a Prime member, I have no idea how long it will take, but it'll be here. It'll be here. So feel free to check that out if you want. It's a great thing. The book does the same thing that we're trying to accomplish. It's trying to use scripture to show the steps behind life transformation here. Rick actually discussed in the podcast this week something called the Oxford Group, and how the 12 steps and how they were birthed out of this desire to see life transformation occur from the Bible. If you are kind of skeptical on this whole thing, or if you're just super interested, check that out on our last podcast. There's some great information on all of that. But we're just going to jump into steps 2 and 3 here this morning. And step 2 simply says this. It says, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Could restore us to sanity. I am a growing soccer fan. We got any soccer fans out there? I know it's playoffs, but any soccer fans? Anybody? There's a couple of guys. I got a couple here, some little like shy hands. It's okay, guys. You can be proud of it. It's good. I have a ton of respect for the sport, mainly because of like the international appeal is amazing, but also I love soccer fans. Soccer fans are some rowdy bunches, right? Like you watch the Lions tonight and you'll see like somebody who's got this weird lion's head and face paint that might wash off, we'll have to see. And like that looks crazy. But if you watch international soccer, they're nuts. They're jumping up and down, the stadium's going crazy. They've got all of these chants. And for me, it was the 2014 World Cup that really piqued my interest. I was working at a barbecue restaurant. We were slow at the time. We had the World Cup on the TVs, and I was enthralled. If you guys remember that for any reason, it was the year Vuvuzelas came out. Does anybody remember these things? There were these annoying horns that just went for like the entire tournament. It was terrible. It was absolutely atrocious. But I loved when they would listen to the songs and the chants that all these international communities would get together and they would customize them for players to cheer on or to belittle their opponents or whatever it was. And I was addicted to it. In fact, it was that 2014 World Cup that the U.S. soccer fans came up with this chant. And they started chanting this, and it's become ingrained in soccer culture. And so we're going to practice chanting this morning, right? You got up this morning, you looked at the snow, and you were like, I want to be interactive at church. I really do, right? I know that's what you said. We're going to try it, okay? So I'm going to say something, and you're going to repeat it. There's no thought involved. You just repeat, all right? And we're going to see if we can get you guys chanting. So take a sip of coffee. We're all doing this together. You ready? All right, it starts with this. It says, I. Nice. Rick is excited. He got up early. I love it. I believe. I believe that. I believe that we. I believe that we will win. 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 Beautiful. I love it. We're going to need a little more excitement when the Lions play later on, but that was pretty good, guys. For early service, that was pretty good. I love it. This chant started actually with the U.S. Naval Academy, and then it became adopted into U.S. soccer and sporting events. And if we're being honest, it's not super creative, right? It wasn't like some great rhyme or anything to be a part of that, but it's super powerful. In fact, when you go to a U.S. soccer game or even any of the regular soccer games that they play around the country and they sing this chant, they chant this together, it's incredibly powerful to hear thousands of people saying it. Why? Why? Because of the power of belief. It's the belief that matters. See, belief is incredibly powerful. Having belief does not mean that you can do anything, but you can do nothing without it. Step 2 is all about belief. It's not about doing or knowing or understanding. It's about believing that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And for those of us that are caught up in addiction, you probably already believe some things. You believe that you're unfixable. You believe that things will never get better. You believe that if somebody knew everything about you, they wouldn't love you anymore. Belief is powerful. Belief will drive us to or away from things. Belief will pick us up or it will weigh us down. Check out this story here in Mark chapter 5. It says this, it says, they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of Gerasenes, and when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart, and he broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. See, Jesus is going around teaching, and he travels across the sea. And when he gets out of the boat, he meets a man who is insane. This guy is not in his right mind. He lives with dead bodies. He cries out randomly. He commits self-harm, and nobody is able to stop this guy. Whatever they do, he breaks out and he goes back to his harmful ways. This guy is the first person to meet Jesus when he arrives. And here's what I'm willing to bet. This man and the people around him hated what was going on. Who knows how long this guy had been trapped in this lifestyle? That at his core, he probably resented himself in the things that he was doing. He probably begged for something different, and yet every single time he went back to the tombs, back to the yelling and back to the cutting. I'm sure people around him just avoided him. Like if you couldn't help him, if you couldn't stop him, then like, what else could you even do for this guy? His actions probably had an effect on people around him, and by now they probably just wanted this guy to just stay away. Some of you guys have felt that way with a loved one who's fighting an addiction. Being around them is hard. You just want life to go back to normal. You hate that you gotta be on edge every single time they come around. See, I have to think that this man and the people around him believed that he was stuck like this forever. Like, think about it. This man lives inside tombs where bodies are decaying all around him. At night, when you're having movie night with your kids, you can hear him screaming off in the distance. When you go out and about and you're walking the streets, he shows up and he's bleeding from the cuts that he's put on himself. Nothing had worked. Nothing had fixed him. They had to believe that this was just his life. Stuck forever, fighting a demon and living with harmful consequences for yourself and those around you. That sounds an awful lot like addiction to me. Stuck and believing that you have to live with the harmful consequences for yourself and those around you. But here's the thing. Jesus shows up. Jesus shows up. Look at verse 6. It says that when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and he fell down before him, and crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send him out of the country. Now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs, let us enter them." And so he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the sea. The herdsmen fled and told it in the city and in the country, and people came to see what it was that had happened. And they came to Jesus, and they saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion, sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs, and they began to beg Jesus to depart from the region. And as he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might be with him. And he did not permit him, but he said to him, "Go to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he's had mercy on you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everybody marveled. See, the second part of our phrase for our second step tells us that our belief is in a power greater than ourselves that could restore us to sanity. What this man could not accomplish on his own and what other people had given up trying to help him with is exactly what Jesus was strong enough to do. For some of us, we hear the word sanity and we begin to think, it feels a little extreme. The word sanity feels a little extreme. The simple definition for sanity is simply having mental faculties in such a condition as to be able to anticipate and judge the effects of one's actions. See, the problem is that when we are struggling with addictions, we're not thinking with a sane mind. It's not that you're dumb or weak or uncaring. It's that the draw to whatever has a hold on you is so strong, it begins to cloud reason and wisdom in our mind. It's the reason that you may be able to look at somebody else and their addictions and say, "Look, man, come on. You know that that's destructive. You know this isn't going to end well. You know you're going to get hurt or it's going to wind up hurting somebody else. Like, make better choices. Stay away from that. Leave those people. Walk away from that place. Call somebody." But when it comes to our thing, we know what that fog feels like. We lose our sanity. And yet we have to be humble enough to recognize that it is not natural or wise or sane to feel anxious or fearful or consumed or stuck in emotional turmoil. See, I think this is where the spiritual component begins to come in. Addiction has a physical side. We know that. We know that some people are predisposed to certain addictions. We know that biology plays a role, but we're not just physical beings. We've got a deep and very real spiritual component to us as well. And within that part of our life, man, we have an enemy. See, Satan has no desire for you and I to experience freedom or joy. The Bible tells us that he comes to seek and to kill and to destroy. And whatever your addiction may be, man, Satan is looking to whisper lies that are going to feed into that addiction. He wants to plant doubts to help you cover and hide it up. He wants you to be consumed and weighed down. And he wants you to be hurt by those pains. Ephesians 6:12 says, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places." And there is a spiritual component to dealing with addictions that pushes you and me out of our sane mind and into trusting the lies and the draw and the urge and the false security. See, I think the reason that it's an addiction is because we can't stop it by ourselves. I think this man who was possessed was not in his sane mind and was struggling with a mental health component and with an addiction component and with a demonic component. It's okay that it's all of those things. It's allowed to be all of those things. I think a lot of people struggle with those things. It would be foolish to think that when we deal with struggles and harmful habits, that it's just a strength of the mind or a physical compulsion. We have an enemy that's stronger than us, that hates us and is actively seeking to harm us. And wants to cloud our judgment and consume our focus onto whatever our addiction may be so that we're gonna bear its burden and maybe even pass that along to somebody else. And just like this man that we read about, we are powerless to stop Satan on our own. But we aren't on our own. When this step talks about the idea of a power greater than ourselves, it's intentionally being vague with the recognition that people are in different places in their journey towards Jesus. But man, we recognize that that power is Jesus. See, I love the story in Mark 5 because it shows that this legion of demons that have control over this man fully recognized who Jesus is. Look at verse 7. It says, "And crying out with a loud voice, he said, 'What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you, by God, do not torment me.'" These demons recognized and they called Jesus Son of the Most High God. Not powerful Jesus, not helpful Jesus, not great Jesus, but Son of the Most High God. They recognized that in front of Jesus, they held no power. They weren't strong enough compared to the Most High God. In fact, their response was to beg for mercy and to be sent to pigs. Because when evil meets Jesus, it flees. If you want to break free from addiction, you can't do it on your own. You can't control it. You can't hide it. You can't fix it. The only thing you can do is place it face to face in front of the Son of the Most High God and watch it begin to flee. Nothing had worked for this man except for Jesus. When Jesus shows up, healing begins. Transformation occurs. Evil, addiction, and demons flee. Jesus is greater than our willpower. He's greater than our strength. He's greater than anything that Satan can attack us with. The whole reason Jesus came was to bring restoration from sin and evil, and addiction is just that. Once you've acknowledged that you are powerless over your sin and that your life has become unmanageable, you can move on to believing that Jesus is able to restore us to sanity. Then that belief is going to put you in front of a decision. See, step 3 says this. It says, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. See, we have a great struggle in our home. There's yelling, there's crying, there's been the occasional physical altercation, And it's all centered around a British pig named Peppa. It's awful. We have a little Google Home screen in our kitchen. And sometimes, while the girls are eating breakfast, we'll allow them to watch Peppa Pig on it. It allows us to maybe cook breakfast or get ready for the day, or those sweet, sweet moments where we can just like sip coffee in quiet. It's beautiful. We love it. And in reality, in theory, this should work. In reality, it absolutely does not. Inevitably, somebody is no longer going to want to watch that one episode of Peppa Pig anymore. And we're teaching our kiddos that when that moment arrives, they can simply ask the other person, hey, can we try a different episode? Can we try a different show? Can we share? Can I have a turn? Can we set a timer? There are so many good options. So many good options. And yet, from time to time, what happens is somebody will grab that Google Home, put it in front of their face, and click buttons as fast as they can before their sister does anything. And then we have screaming, yelling, and violence that begin to ensue in our home. See, what happens here is as our girls begin to engage in this, and they begin to yell, and they begin to get at one another, we've recognized that they don't actually care about the show. They're pretty flexible. That if we ask them, can we change the show? Yeah, sure. Hey, can we turn it down? Yeah, for sure. Hey, can we pause that for a second? Okay, sure. Right? They're pretty flexible. What they really want is control. They just want control. They want to push the buttons. They want to pick the show. They want the device in front of them. And honestly, I don't blame them. I like control too. I like choosing things that I want and when I want them. In fact, I would prefer that the whole world would just be on my schedule. If I had enough control to get exactly what I wanted and avoid the things that I don't, I would do it. The problem is when I try to control everything, I get the exact same results that my girls do when they grab the screen. Everything just becomes unplugged. And it doesn't work out at all. See, we aren't actually good at controlling things like we think we are. In fact, we could comb through the Bible and we'll find story after story of people who tried to control things, and it quickly becomes unraveled for them. David tried to control his affair. Joseph's brothers tried to control him and his father's love. Haman tried to control the king, and every story ends with the same idea, that we are not in control of our lives. And the more that we tightly try to hold on to everything, the more we're going to recognize and see that. See, step 3 understands that. It's all about giving up control. It's recognizing that things are best outside of our control and instead under the care of God. The struggle in regard to addiction drops most of us into one of two categories when it comes to control. The first is that we think we can handle it. A lot of people refuse to get help or acknowledge their pattern of addiction and destruction because they think that they're strong enough or smart enough or determined enough or capable enough to control it. I saw a post online a couple weeks ago of a guy who wrote onto Twitter and just simply said, man, I am so excited to gamble this morning. I literally woke up shaking. Right? And the very first comment underneath of it said, that's what addiction looks like, right? And the next thing that he said was, man, I've been gambling for 30 years and I haven't gotten addicted yet. I think I would know what it looks like. There's a little bit of denial and control issues within that, right? Right? Some of us, we struggle to give up that control because we think we can handle it. For some, we cling to our anxiety because we feel like worry allows us to control and prevent bad things from happening. For others, we feel like our secret addiction can be controlled and we can keep it to stay small and unknown and unharmful. And we think we have it under control because we really only do it in times where we're stressed or we feel pressure or pain. The reality is, on your own, you cannot control your addiction. On your own, addiction controls you. The second category is full of people that seek to control because they just don't trust others, especially God. See, a lot of times this is rooted in hurtful or bad assumptions about who God is. In reading this book that we're going through, A Hunger for Healing, the author tells the stories of two guys who are talking about this step. And the new guy to the program here responds to this step here, and he says, there's absolutely no way I'm going to turn my life over to God. He'd ruin me, and I deserve it. The guy goes on to tell stories about how, for him, God is a police officer and that he doesn't have any good history with the police. The guy who's been listening to this for a while finally responds to him. He says, you know what? You ought to fire that God. You ought to fire him. You've got the wrong God for this program. The God who operates here is loving, forgiving, and he gives all the chances that you need. Some of us struggle to give up control to God because we have a false idea of who God is. We struggle with phrases like Father God because our relationship with our parents was not happy. It was not healthy. It was not full of love. We struggle with God because somebody who claimed to know God did things that caused horrible pain for us or somebody that we know. And if that's okay, then that God's not okay. The truth is that God has shown us who he is in his word. The source for knowing and understanding God comes from the Bible. Reading the Bible is going to show you an honest picture of who God is, that he's just, and that he's strong, and that he's sovereign and gracious and powerful and loving and honest and in control. One of my favorite descriptions of God, I've talked about this before, it comes from C.S. Lewis in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And it's when confronted with this idea of Aslan, the lion, who's this picture of God. One of the characters, Lucy, asks this question. She says, is he safe? Is he safe? And Mr. Beaver responds, safe? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he's good. And he's the king, I tell you. Another character says, he's wild, you know. He's not a tame lion. The reality is that God is who he is. He's bigger, more complex, and more powerful than any images that we may have in our head. Time and again, Scripture shows us that when God shows up, he shocks the people around him because he's different and he's greater than what they expected. Turning your will and your life over to the care of God is turning it over to someone who is way beyond you and your capabilities. Somebody who is truly good, who is completely in control, and who loves you deeper than you can begin to grasp. When your addiction is the problem, your ability to control is not the answer. The only solution is rooted in trusting the one true God that is capable of far more than you and I, and that we can begin to comprehend. Addiction is too big for just us, but it is too small to stand up to God. Understanding that you are powerless, believing that God is able to restore and giving control over to him to help are foundational to finding a breakthrough from the weight of addiction. See, there's some practical steps that we're going to talk through over these next few weeks in this series, but they're all built upon this idea. The key that unlocks the door to healing and growth and restoration starts with accepting the idea that I can't, but God can. If I had to guess, there's a lot of people who are still resistant to these steps and these ideas. It's so easy to say that this whole thing is for somebody else, somebody that's more broken, somebody with a bigger issue. It's easy to say that, man, my thing is small. My thing is manageable. My thing is under control. Or you know what? I can at least get it under control. Those are the type of insane things that Satan wants you to believe, because those are the ideas that keep us alone with our problems. Maybe you need to practice some chanting until you trust and believe it. I can't, but God can. I can't, but God can. I can't, but God can. It is possible to find healing. It is possible to break through. It is possible for God to transform every single part of your life. Do you believe? And can you let go of the control? Let's pray this morning. God, we can't, you are so much more capable than we are. God, we are broken, and you are powerful. We are hurting, and you are a healer, God. God, help us not to believe the lies that we have control. Help us not to believe the lies that we are all by ourselves, God. Help us to trust that you are good, that you are running after us, that you love us and care for us. God, help us to believe in you and to decide to follow you. We love you, Jesus. Amen.